Hello everyone. Welcome to the Casual F1 podcast. We are at the midway point of the season. We're basically enjoying the summer break. Well, not us, basically the drivers and the teams. So, with 12 races done, I felt it was about time we just take a look back at how the season has been, who has done what, who has been the surprise of the season, what's been the shocking part. So, yeah, to do all that, I invited my friend Peter Brook over. Peter has been a guest at this podcast even before. So yeah, it was a good experience the last time we got together and had a chat. I hope we have a similar one this time around as well. So yes, Peter, welcome to the Casual Elephant podcast. How are you? How are things?
I'm very good, thank you, and thanks for having me on.
By the way, how many subscribers
Yeah,
right now on your YouTube channel?
22,700, something like that,
Ah,
approximately.
impressive. You had your live
So
chat or
it's
something
growing
like this.
quite nicely.
You did a Q&A, right?
I did a Q&A for when I passed 20,000, although I actually did that. It was about a month after passing 20,000, so it was more like a 21,000
No, still
Q&A.
it's nice.
Um,
So something
yeah.
you're working on right now
Mm.
in terms of your video?
Yeah, I've got something a bit different coming up. I'm basically doing my own hypothetical manifesto if I was FIA president, and talking about all the different rules that I would change in terms of technical and sporting regs, and how I'd change the calendar and broadcasting and hospitality and all of that. Because yeah, I like to moan about safety cars and the calendar and everything. So
So
let's just
basically, no more Middle East
see what I can
races.
do.
That is one thing that's going to happen.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're all gone. No more sprint races.
yeah. Screw that.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, yeah.
I think this is the first time in my time of following the sport I was actually confused with the qualifying format. When we had Nick de Vries, sorry, not Nick de Vries, Lance Stroll on mediums in Spa, when he came out for the mediums in the drying track, and it was SQ2, I think. Now I questioned why he did not go out on softs, or I mean the soft tire made more sense, right, at that particular point. So apparently it had to do with the fact that the
Mm.
track was not declared wet, and this is just complicating things too much, at
Yeah,
least
that
in
was the
my
one.
view.
I didn't. Yeah, I didn't know that they had an official classification of, the circuit's wet or the circuit's dry. It's like, maybe just look at the track and decide, instead of declaring it wet when it's obviously wet. Like,
Yeah, me neither. And I
yeah, it just the,
there
the
was another
sprint
thing with
qualifying. I mean, they changed it. They changed it to a better system, but it's still, now it's just meaningless because Saturday and Sunday have got nothing to do with each other
exactly,
anymore.
exactly, yeah. So
Mm.
first of all, talking about the 2023 F1 season, I see you're not a huge fan of sprints. How's the season been for you?
Um, okay, I guess. Basically, I mean, it's becoming predictable, obviously, in that it's a given. It's a given that Red Bull are going to win every race. We know that
Yeah,
already, unless they have some major, like, unless it just all goes tits up, which it may happen. It tends to happen to most teams at least once a year. They have a race where just nothing works for them.
yeah,
But the thing is, people complain nothing's happening. Is I think there is a lot happening behind Max. It is actually very mixed up.
yeah,
Despite the fact the reliability is so good, that you can't even think, oh, I'll gain like 5 positions from people breaking down or whatever. And the midfield is very mixed and is moving around a lot. But the problem is that doesn't mean anything, because it's not fighting for the title or for race wins.
yeah,
It's just we're watching scraps for like 11th and 12th place.
yeah. The stakes are not there. That kind of hurts. That hurts the sport.
Mm.
I mean that's I tend to go back to it again and again. That's what made the 2021 season or the 2012 season so good. We had Pastor Maldonado winning a race in 2012 and challenging for it. We had Grosjean leading the race. We had around 7
Mm.
different winners. Right now it's a bit like it's a one man thing. The entire show is basically Max winning and whoever comes second or third. So yeah, that's true. That
Mm.
is something that. But don't you think that's just Formula One at the end of the day? The regulations. I I think I always come back to this thing that at the crux of the crux of the matter is whenever we are watching a sport, there is always one team or one driver or one player that tends to lead from the front. The fact that right now it's Red Bull and probably Max, it's maybe something that was always going to happen. It's eventual. The eventuality of a driver, maybe the cream rising to the top. It's expected in a certain way. Don't you think that that might be the case here as well?
Yeah, I think, I mean, mixed seasons like 2012 are not actually that common. When you look at it, most champions have won by quite large margins, and they've been in what is obviously the fastest car. And you get the old one here and there, such as obviously 2021, 76, 2008, where it is a very close fight and it goes down to the wire. But in most cases, there is quite a large gap to the front. And it's always going to be that way because Formula One isn't a spec series, and it shouldn't
Exactly.
be a spec series. That one team is always going to come out better than other. But we have it is an interesting position because these are such restrictive regulations, and all of the cars look basically the same. Aside from the side pod design, there's not much variation.
Yeah.
And the field spread is very close. I mean, there's about less than 2 seconds a lap covering the whole field, and in Spa, nobody got lapped, which I don't think has happened before without safety cars and red
True.
flags and everything. But then go back to late 70s, early 80s. Every year there was a different. There was a period where we had six different champions in 6 years or something, and this was the era of
We
ground
did.
effect and turbo engines and carbon fiber coming in, and it was all just
By the way,
mixing.
Peter,
It was
which era are you talking about? Where we had six different champions from 81 to
like no late 70s, early 80s. So if you go
late 70s,
like
early 80s. So we
77
had
to
Andretti,
82
Hunt,
or 83.
Lauda, Jones, Watson.
Uh,
Uh, maybe I'm missing someone. So yeah,
so if you go from 76 on 76, what Lauda, no, Hunt,
Hunt,
Lauda,
Lauda. 77 was
Andretti,
Lauda.
Scheckter, Jones, PK, and then Rosberg.
True.
So that's seven consecutive years of seven different champions, and then it was PK again in 83.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and that was probably the sharpest rise in terms of innovation in car design because of ground effect and turbos and stuff like that.
True.
And we just don't have that now because they're way too restrictive, the regulations. And so if you
And
don't
even
have
at that point,
a
the thing is, at that
if you've
point,
built a
being
concept that
successful
doesn't,
in F1 was a bit easier as well, no? Because you had team Williams came into F1 in like 3 or 4 years. It became a world champion with Jones. You can't really do that anymore. The kind of investment and funding that Williams had at that point in time, it wasn't much. But the thing is, right, at that point in time, the technology was much more primitive to an extent. It was easier to get everything on board, and they just had to build a
yeah,
car. Now it's everything is so sophisticated, and I think that is what what where I come down to when we take everything into consideration. Even today, if we have Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, and Aston Martin, all of them have the same car at their disposal. The championship will be interesting, but I think I'll still back the Max Verstappen Red Bull combo to win almost 10 out of 10 times in terms of the entire championship. I'll always give them the edge. The reason being, as we compare it to the 1980s, there were too many areas where you could fiddle around. There were too many. You had a strategy. There was a strategy unit where probably the wiggle room was a bit larger. Then you had the aero. Then you had the engine. All these variables were too big and they could influence in different ways. Right now, all of them are operating Like we have this thing, no, in any video game or a PC game, when we talk about it, there are different levels. There's the technical aspect, the aero, the engine, the strategy, and so on. Right now, all these teams are operating at roughly 94%, and it's Red Bull that is at 99, 99, 99, 99. And that's why it tends to
Hmm.
have that incremental advantage, and it wins from it almost every time. And that I mean, every time I think about it, that is where I think Red Bull has differentiated. It's arguably the one of the more perfect teams in F1 right now. Everything, every box is ticked, and I don't think Mercedes had that during their era.
Yeah, I mean, Mercedes, they often race strategies weren't as good as they could be, but it didn't matter because the car was so fast. And
Hmm.
again, the Hamilton Rosberg rivalry, as entertaining as it wasn't brilliant for team cohesion, and they did,
True.
take points off each other. But again, the car was so fast that it didn't matter. Um, and we've seen races such as Sakia 2020 where just everything goes wrong all at once and stuff like that. And there are some races that their cars have often been susceptible to overheating.
Yeah.
And maybe painting the whole thing black wasn't such a good idea in that regard. But they're fairly mild because the thing is that their cars have still been supremely reliable. I mean, I think Hamilton, since joining Mercedes, he's had maybe 6 mechanical breakdowns in races or something. It's
Yeah.
almost nothing.
Very few.
But Red Bull as well, they have continuity because Christian Horner and Helmut Marko have been with the team since it was founded, and then Adrian Newey has been with them
2005.
since 2007. So in terms of staff, they're not constantly firing people and bringing new people in like Ferrari and Alpine and everyone else does. It's been the drivers change
Yeah.
a lot, and obviously you can say a lot about their choice of drivers and the way they move them around, but the core team behind the scenes has remained largely unchanged. And it helps that obviously Adrian Newey is the one person that everyone wants. I mean, every team he's worked for have just had the best car basically in one way or another through his, at least in terms of aerodynamics.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
And that has been the case since Leighton House, where I think he spent almost, I think, a year or so, not more than that, from where I think Williams poached him very early on. But yeah, that is where it all happened. Anyhow, now coming
Hmm.
to the 2023 Formula One season. Now, in this podcast, what we are trying to do is we're basically looking back at the season. We'll pick various categories and try to give our views on that. So, first of all, the category that I actually wanted to talk about was the most disappointing team. So, who is your pick when we talk about the most disappointing team of the first half of the 2023 season? What are
Hmm.
you leaning towards?
Uh, I'm going to lean towards Haas, actually, I think. Because they obviously had something of a breakthrough last year where suddenly they
Hmm.
were, well, in the first half of the season, they were getting into Q3 again, and Magnussen was starting to fight for points, and then he got his sprint pole in
Brazil.
Brazil, which, it's officially listed as pole, but I don't know if I don't really count that because if it was on Saturday, he wouldn't have got pole.
Yeah.
He just the rain happened and George Russell happened and that. But this year now they're hovering in the back 3 teams, and obviously occasionally Magnussen gets into Q3, but points are still really rare. No, Hulkenberg gets into Q3. Sorry, Magnussen is just doing nothing. He's been kind of usurped by Hulkenberg, but they're just not. They've just become dull because it's not like they're even having these calamitous pit stops or funny things going on with
Yeah.
sponsors anymore. That used to be their thing, as they've always been like the joke team.
Yeah.
They're not. They're just boring now. They're just slow and doing nothing.
No, that's true.
I'm hoping that we get some big scandal with MoneyGram, because there was a thing about apparently Haas Automation is still sending equipment to Russia. Also, maybe something will happen with that.
No,
But
no. I
they've
think
become really
they
dull.
clarified that part. I think they clarified that part. It seems to be fine,
Yeah, I think
and
they sent out a
most
statement, and I
probably
was like,
nothing
yeah,
will happen.
we probably haven't heard the end of this, but yeah.
Let's see. I mean, yeah, there is certainly some truth to it. By the way, what do you make of Magnussen's loss of form, or whatever we can call it right now? What's happened?
I don't know if it's so much the loss of form. I mean, the thing is, he's kind of as a driver. I mean, I have maybe reasonably good insight into this because I've been covering Haas in one of my team history series, and I just completed the 2019 video.
Okay,
He seemed to be, when you compare him to Grosjean, the difference was that Haas was he was more consistent. He was often just kind of in the middle, whereas Grosjean would either be amazing or just abominable, and it would just go back and
true.
forth between the two. And Magnussen would just kind of hover in. So Magnussen would have off weekends as well, but he would just kind of hover in the middle and that. But he maybe it's just that Hulkenberg is just walking all over him because he's better. But then you say Hulkenberg is again another midfielder who hasn't had a podium yet, and they're supposed to not really get on as well. So it's an interesting choice of teammates.
They
And
seem to
that,
be
but
fine now, but
I think also
they're
last year,
just they're just too old
I
to
think yeah, they
bicker
seem
about
better now.
anything
I mean,
new.
last year, yeah, I mean, obviously last year and the year before, no, it was only last year he came back. He was the senior driver because he was against Mick, and it was a team he'd returned to that he'd been with for a very long time. But now he's not the senior driver because, okay, Hulkenberg is his first year with Haas, but Hulkenberg is older and he's been in F1 a lot longer than Magnussen as well. And so maybe
I
that's
guess it
just
has
part of
more
it.
to do with the fact. I think it none of it would have really mattered if Hulkenberg had not been this dominant against Magnussen. I mean, roughly the gap is around half a second in qualifying. That's humongous. No, even Max doesn't have
Mm,
it against Checo. So it's hard to understand what's going on, because either Magnussen has dropped the ball somewhere from 2022 to 2023, or Hulkenberg has found something very elite, or maybe these cars suit him better. Because even last year, when he basically got off the couch and outqualified Lance Stroll in the very first race in Aston Martin. It's
yeah,
it's hard to understand what's going on,
I mean
because yeah.
he's got his first full time seat since 2019 now. So that for him is good in
Hmm.
terms of stability and continuity, but also he did used to complain a lot about the previous era of cars, particularly up till 2016, basically because of the lack of torque. Is that as powerful as the engine is, you can't do anything with it because the wheels just spin all the
Yeah, one of the
time.
bigger issues was the fact that he
And so maybe he
was
just
too
didn't enjoy
big
those
for the
cars so much. And
cars. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, again, his
this
height.
is, yeah, this is so well documented now. And I think it was a rubbish rule where I think they included the driver weight in the entire scheme of things. So drivers had to really basically starve themselves to a point where they could reach the minimal sustainable weight to drive a car. And it is actually stated by
Mm,
I don't know who it was in Force India, that because Hulkenberg was this big, it hurt his the whole tire management part of the race, as well as it also was around a tenth or a tenth and a half that he would lose to Sergio Perez just because he was heavier. And that did
yeah.
compromise his career a lot during that time, because 2013 Hulkenberg was hot property. He was pretty impressive, and did he was linked with, I think, Ferrari and McLaren at the time, and even Mercedes. Apparently, he was the second choice
Mm,
if Lewis had not signed. So yeah, that
yeah.
didn't happen. And from that point, look, I've always felt that Hulkenberg is a very talented driver. Maybe midfield, or maybe closer to what a Nico Rosberg was, at least in my view. Again, there are many that might disagree with that.
Mm,
And I feel with these cars, he's been able to drive more to his liking, and maybe that is shining a bit right now. Maybe, I'm not entirely sure, because the gap is too big. A half a second gap to a
yeah.
driver who got pole position last season, it cannot all be down to just one of the two. Maybe both Hulkenberg is overperforming and Magnussen is struggling at the same time.
Yeah, I think Haas is still having problems with tire temperatures as
Yeah,
well, and that's been
there's
an
been
ongoing thing since 2019. And you would see again for doing the research for the 2019 video, you're watching the onboards of Magnussen, and every race he's just going backwards and people passing him at every corner because the tires are just not
Yeah,
working like right from the outset.
it was a
And so
it
that's
was a
probably
bit of a
playing a
disaster.
role still,
So
I
yeah,
think.
yeah,
Yeah.
true, true. So yeah, in your view, it's Haas, right? Now, in my view, I think this might be a more predictable answer, but I think Alpine is arguably the most disappointing team right now of the first half of the season. They've become a joke. The it's Alp. I actually wrote a tweet about it as well, that Alpine is basically Ferrari without the accomplishments, without the resources, with the ambition, but with no means to ultimately achieve that. And that is Alpine in
Hmm.
crux, and that is what it has been since 2016 when they came back. There's no, I mean, I was very optimistic about the team at the end of the last season when Otmar was doing a decent job. They were P4, and there were talks about making improvements, and it made sense. But somehow the team has imploded
Hmm.
in ways I'm slightly confused. I don't understand the firing of Otmar and Permain. I don't get that. But yeah, what's your take on this, on the whole Alpine fiasco?
I mean, with Alpine, in terms of their race pace, I'm not enormously concerned because it's not significantly different from last year. Obviously, they've lost Alonso, but they haven't. They're still hovering around on average about fifth fastest team, and there's been because Aston Martin are going backwards, they're sometimes faster than them, and
Hmm.
obviously they've had. I mean, Hungary, that wasn't their fault, but that was a bit of a disaster. But yeah, you get teams like this where behind the scenes everything is wrong, and they keep thinking, "Oh, if we fire this person and bring this in, this is going to fix it." And there's just it's the
That's the
complete.
stupidest
It's a team
mentality.
that's had
And
a complete
when
lack of
you,
stability.
I can't
Like,
understand. This is something that I've never understood. That when you look at Formula One and you look at the last decade since 2010, there are only two teams that have won championships. One of them is Mercedes, and the other is Red Bull. One of their team principals stuck with the team even though he did not win the title from 2013 to 2021. For 8 years, he had a barren period and he was still the team principal. And here we have teams replacing team principals after 2 years. How does it make sense? You have a blueprint in front of you, just use it. And no team is willing to do that. It's completely nonsensical, and it's entirely, I don't know, it's probably the French way of doing things, or maybe it's the Italian way of doing things, that they don't, they look inward, but they don't look, they just need to look at the grid and how a Mercedes is being successful, or how a Red Bull has basically created such a huge empire. It's there in front of you, just follow that.
yeah, because even not with the staff, just the image of the team keeps changing because they were Renault a couple of years ago, and then before that they were Lotus, and then they were Renault again, and they keep switching the management and the branding changes as well, and there is no stability. I mean, it's a team that has been very in all its different forms because it goes back to obviously it was originally Renault going back to the 70s.
Yeah.
It's always been so topsy turvy in terms of performance. It's not like Ferrari, where they have been consistently at least top half of the grid for their entire history. They've never been a backmarker team except maybe 1980. But Renault slash Alpine slash Lotus they just go up and down all the time. Um,
Yeah,
and they just lack there's just no real semblance of
I
consistency
think it's
there.
basically having
I mean, is Prost
unrealistic
still with
goals.
them or?
Oh no, he blasted the entire team.
Mm.
He was very
Yeah,
harsh
because I saw him
about
slagging
the
them off, and I
way
thought, I'm
Rossi
guessing he's
conducted
not with them
himself.
anymore.
Yeah, and he's not the
Yeah,
only one. I think Cyril Abiteboul, he has also come out and said a few things. Even Marcin Budkowski, he has come out and
yeah,
said something similar. And I don't know,
yeah.
until and unless
I
they
mean, he was obviously at
basically
Beatable.
take
He was
things
very kind
seriously.
of ambitious, and he had
Yeah, Cyril, you're talking about Cyril, right?
Cyril. He was very ambitious, and he had kind of long term goals that involved Ricciardo, and then Ricciardo left very suddenly, which kind of messed things up for him. But he seemed to have at least have an idea of what he wanted to do. Because then they had those years of Maldonado and Grosjean, which were just a train wreck. And there was some British guy running the team. I've forgotten the one that goes on Mixed Apex all the time. Matthew Carter,
Oh,
that's it. He was running the team for a bit, and then they had Eric Boulier as well. And it's just
yeah, but that was not
they've been through endless
Renault, right?
different.
Renault had sold off the team by 29.
Well, that was when they were that was when they were Lotus. That's when they were called Lotus. But it's the same. It's the same
Yeah, but
Enstone based team.
Lotus was brought. I think Lotus was bought by Renault again. I think that is how the whole thing happened. No, first it was sold off, and then
Yeah,
it was
because
bought
they
back.
became Renault, then they became Lotus.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Renault, then it was Lotus Renault, then it was Lotus, and then it became Renault again. It's They can't make their minds up. It's like Honda; they just can't make their minds up with F1.
Yeah. And they still can't. They want to be successful in Formula One, but they don't want to put in the money. And it's just too disappointing because they had such a good
Yeah,
platform right now. I mean, go. I look, and even I think to an extent, Otmar made sense because he was brought into the team. He was given a vision of having 100 races to take the team to the top. And then after 20 odd races, the Renault board wants the team to start winning the race by almost half the margin, by 50 races. Now, when you change the goalpost like this, it's just not possible. And I think Otmar made sense. He said, I think his quote was quite impressive. I think it was something like, "You can't make 9 women pregnant and have a kid and expect a kid in 1 month," something like that. So,
yeah,
and yeah, it's true. It's true. There's nothing wrong about it. But yeah, I think I've personally
yeah.
been very disappointed with the whole you can say nuisance that this team has become, because even last year, if you remember, it was during this time that Alpine had probably the worst time of the season, where you had Oscar Piastri basically declining a drive for Alpine, Alonso ditching them, and now this season they don't even have a team principal while they're heading towards the summer break. I don't know what the future holds for the team right now. So unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay, so by the
I
way,
mean,
now we're done.
if they're intent on
Yeah,
becoming a kind of
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if they're intent on becoming an all French team, they should probably move their base to France as well, because they're still at Enstone at the moment, and it's like, yeah,
It doesn't make sense, no.
for the image, maybe they should.
No, it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense because apparently the thing is, I think a UK base tends to help these teams because the entire talent is based in UK. So it's very easy
Yeah.
to basically hire from Milton Keynes and get them on board, or maybe even from Silverstone and get them. It does. That's why the entire, you can say, most of the F1 teams are based around that area, and that's why Lauren McKees was so. The whole process of moving McKees to uh, Faenza, that is why that has actually happened, because he was in Maranello all this time. He can easily move to Faenza, but he will never move to UK, and that is why when something like a team principal role came in, he jumped on it with both hands. Sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, so moving from the most disappointing team, now talking about the most disappointing driver. Which one are you? Who is something that has basically not stood out but has been a bit disappointing for you?
Well, I think it has to be Checo, to be honest. We went in the first couple of races. We thought, oh, maybe he's going to fight for the title, and he was saying, "Oh, I'm going to push for it." And he won in Jeddah and Baku, and they're like, "Well, this is fairly even." But then he had that string of races of getting 4 races in a row. Was he getting knocked out in Q1? And as we've seen, he doesn't have in Miami, and then again in Spa, he doesn't have much in terms of racecraft to defend against Max with, even though he's supposed to be a fantastic defender and everything. Yeah. And he's the only one who's in a position to actually challenge Max, and just like with Bottas at Mercedes, he's giving him little to no challenge.
Yeah, I agree.
Basically,
it's very disappointing to see that. But I think I have a theory on this. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. When it comes to the average qualifying gap between Max and Sergio, do you think it has fluctuated too much, or is it just the case that when the Red Bull is dominant, when that around roughly 3 to 4 to 5 tenths of a second, the gap that the two have, when the Red Bull is dominant, you see Max on pole, you see Sergio Perez 4 to 5 tenths behind, but still on P2. When the car is struggling to a certain extent, Max will still be on pole, but he will be on pole from a Charles, Lewis, Lando by less than a tenth, and Sergio will be far behind at the same gap of around 4 to 5 tenths. That is what has happened basically. While the perception might seem that Sergio is not getting the results earlier, and he might have got the results in Austria or in Spa, the thing is the gap has remained the same. It's just that that the Red Bull car is probably more competitive in qualifying in particular tracks and not in others, and that is why Sergio has struggled.
Yeah, I mean the car. I think evidently, unless maybe it's just Checo that's better, the car does seem better in race trim because they I think they've only had one front row start this whole year so far, Red Bull. But Checo, his races are usually fine because it's becoming a bit of a predictable thing, and it's been like this ever since he joined Red Bull, where he messes up in qualifying or he has a really bad start to the race, and then he spends the whole race charging through or trying to charge through, and then he gets fastest lap at the end. And was like, "Oh, well done!" It's like he should have just been running
And the
behind Max
driver
in
of the day.
second in formation the whole time. Yeah, it's but it's the gap. I think it's hard to say how much of it is Max and how much it's the car, because obviously there's that big gap and he can still get second even if he's half a second behind. And like you said, he falls further behind when Max is closer. But then you think to yourself, there's accusations of sandbagging with Red Bull, and you think, and Max is in a position where he doesn't really need to push now, and you think, is Checo really giving it everything as well, or has he reached his limit with it, and Max is just that much better, or does he just not enjoy these cars so much? I mean, I feel like Checo's not. This era of car probably doesn't seem to work for him, or maybe it's the pressure of being at Red Bull, because he never seemed to make this many mistakes when he was at like Force India and that, and he was under far less pressure, of course, but
Yeah,
we're just noticing it a lot more now.
probably.
There's a lot hanging
I think
on
that,
the number
of
two driver
course,
at the
that
top
plays a
team,
role.
because you're dependent on them to create a title battle.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. But the thing is, what I think, if Red Bull had a car, uh, let's. The only issue with the current Red Bull is the fact that it is not a strong qualifying car. I mean, only a tenth. There have been far too many races where Max has got pole by probably a tenth or less than a tenth. It has happened in quite a few races. And the thing is,
Mm.
while Sergio is pretty impressive in races, in qualifying he tends to struggle, and that has been the case. And I just feel that, and look, again, it comes down to the kind of drivers that are there. In case of when Mercedes had this whole battle between Lewis and Rosberg, one of the reasons why Rosberg was able to challenge Lewis was because somehow or the other he would look at Lewis's data and was able to replicate it in terms of a qualifying lap and secure plenty of pole positions. I think he even outqualified Lewis in 2014, and that is something that you need if you actually want to
Yeah, he did.
challenge, right? So if unless you are able to do that, it will fall apart, and that is what is happening with Checo. Pretty, and I think to be honest, I think I've seen enough of Checo at Red Bull in the last 2 seasons to almost laugh at the prospect that quite a few pundits had that maybe Checo might challenge Max this season. I mean, there have been 2 seasons, and I think there has been only one race or maybe two in the entirety of around a 50 race partnership where Checo has actually outperformed Max. When that happens, you know where both the drivers stand.
Yeah,
Really, there was never going to be much of a battle at the end of the day. It was entirely wishful thinking from a lot of media.
Yeah, it's the same with it was the same with Bottas, and then with Webber, and then with Barrichello. It's annoying, but this is just how it
Yes.
goes. Is you have these periods of a top team of dominance, and there's the number one driver. The number two will like to pretend that they're fighting for the title when they're just obviously not, and need to accept that they've been given that position so that they don't challenge the number one, essentially, because they need someone dependable that has a good supporting role that will be consistent.
Yeah.
And it used to annoy me with Bottas, like 2018, 2019. He's like, oh, I'm going to fight Lewis for the title. It's like, okay, Lewis is going to let you win a couple of races at the beginning because he knows he can get away with that. And Lewis is often a bit shaky in season starts. But other than that, it's
Yeah.
just not going to happen because
Yeah.
in terms of qualifying. Again, it was in terms of qualifying with Mercedes. It was very, very close between Bottas and Hamilton. But Bottas's racecraft is near absent. Was the difference. And Barrichello, he was just never really anywhere near Schumacher's pace
I think
in qualifying
Barrichello
all the race.
had
There was
no
the odd race he'd
chance.
win, but yeah.
Yeah. Barrichello just had no chance.
Yeah, he
I,
had
I think
yeah, and
one
it's the
thing
same.
that
It's more
really
similar,
stood
and it's
out.
the same with Red Bull. Is that
Yeah. So one thing that really stood out for, at least for Bottas, in my view, was on his day he could actually challenge Lewis. Every year he would turn up at a race or two where he could just put together a lap or put together a weekend where even Lewis would find it hard to match him. Checo cannot do
mm,
that. That is where the true difference lies, because even Rosberg had it in him, and Rosberg would do it far more frequently than even Bottas did. And he would turn up to a weekend. Be he would never have the kind of raw pace that Lewis does. But when he stitches the entire weekend together, more or less he was able to keep Lewis at bay and win the race, and then move to the next one. And that is a quality that mm,
mm.
most of these number two drivers don't have, and they end up basically succumbing to the pressure. That's what is happening to Checo right now.
Yeah, I mean, this year the only race where he's been genuinely faster than Max is Baku. Like
Yeah,
every other, like, and again he won in Jeddah because Max's gearbox went up in qualifying.
I
He
think
just and
the race in Baku was
yeah,
probably a
that's
huge
just how
wake
it
up call
is.
for Checo, for Max to be. I mean, that was a race where he fought with Russell, and he didn't need to. He got into an argument where he didn't really need to get into an argument with him. Then even
Mm,
before that, he was so disinterested about the sprint race. He sounded bored in the entire press conference and all that. He was too distracted, and it was at that point everything just came together. If it was any other race or any other track, I think Max would have still won. But that weekend he was so distracted that basically Checo just gave it to him and he won it comfortably. And when he did, I think it was at that point that
mm.
Max realized he had to buckle up, because if he keeps making these mistakes, Checo will basically pounce on them. Since then he hasn't.
Yeah,
And it's been 8 races
because
since
I
that
think
since
that
that
was.
happened.
I think at that point the gap was the points gap was still very close as
Six
well. I think Max
points,
was only a
six or
few
seven
points
points.
ahead.
That's all.
Yeah, so it was still very close. Mm,
Yeah. So, by the way, even I had the same choice. That's why I
yeah.
dragged this on a bit. Even in my view, I think the worst I expected from Checo was that he would continue to grab those P2 positions throughout the season. But the way he's fallen off, I think it's been a bit disappointing, especially in races like Barcelona, where Russell started behind him and he was able to finish ahead. And that's just not done. So yeah, even I agree with you. Even in my view,
Mm,
Sergio Perez is arguably the most disappointing driver in the first half of the season. So yeah, our next part is
mm.
the biggest surprise team in terms of the team. Who would you pick?
Um, I think Aston Martin. I was torn between Aston Martin and McLaren.
Hmm.
But obviously Aston Martin, they're starting to tail off a bit now, but otherwise they, or rather Alonso, has had an exemplary first half of the season. We had, I mean, the first like 5 races, obviously he was finishing behind the Mercs, and we looked at that and I was thinking we've got a sort of Vettel 2015 situation on our hands where Red Bull are going to be at the front and he'll be running the 30 seconds behind them for the finishing third every time. And now, because they have fallen behind, people are pointing fewer fingers at Stroll for costing them points.
Yeah.
Because I think they've fallen too far behind Mercedes and Ferrari now for that to have made a huge amount of difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's turning into disappointment as well because they haven't sustained that performance. And Alonso is clearly enjoying himself, even though he's not fighting for wins and that he seems to be in a good place and the team is working. I mean, the weakness is Stroll, and that's this kind of permanent stranglehold that they have on the team. Is
that's
without him, the whole team effectively collapses.
Yeah, it doesn't exist. Yeah, that's the funny bit.
He's just
also
become the Roy Nissany.
He's the reason why the team
Formula
exists
One.
as well.
Like,
Yeah. And actually, regarding this, I'd had a chat with Josh Revell, another content creator. So he specifically told me the story of how much how much Stroll Senior is, how much he goes out of his way to facilitate his son. And he gave me the story of what happened in Formula 3, where if you look at the final standings, you'll see Lance Stroll winning the championship, and you'll have George Russell behind him in P2, P3 or something like that. And there's and Stroll has almost double the points of what Russell did. And when you look at the standings, you think, what the hell happened here? How is it possible that George Russell, a future Mercedes driver, would be losing out to Lance Stroll? And not only losing out, pretty much getting dominated. So the thing that happened was there was Stroll's father, Lawrence. He ended up buying Prema, a part of it. He was a co-owner, and basically took over the entire decision making process. There were people that were hired to make special Mercedes engines for his car, and then there were specific drivers that were used as driver coaches. Felix Rosenquist was one of them, by the way, who basically coached Lance on how to drive these cars. And ultimately, using all these resources, Lawrence was able to help Lance win the Formula 3 World Championship. And that is the model that he's trying to basically replicate in Formula 1. Now, how that happens, and it's as clear as that. Lawrence does not care if Aston Martin wins the title or not, wins any world championship or not. His primary and only aim is Lance should win the world championship. And that is what the entire team is basically working towards. So, how that happens, what is he going to do? For that, ultimately, the team needs to become probably the Mercedes level of competitiveness. But until that is done, that is what he's working towards ultimately.
I think his only hope is that they get rid of the cost cap, because then he can pump his entire net worth into the team and just put billions into it, and then finally give him the supreme car he needs or whatever. But it's, I mean, people say that there's.
I mean, just imagine.
There are some people that say that Stroll himself doesn't really want to. I mean, there are some people that say that Stroll himself doesn't want to do this, and maybe Stroll is getting sick of just hanging around in the midfield, even though he's got a car that can do better than that. And it's like, maybe I feel like that's the only thing that would change things, is if Stroll himself wants to give up and do something else. Because
maybe he takes over as team principal or something, just like Michael Andretti did with the Andretti team, right? Maybe he can do something like that, become the entire motorsport family. Maybe they can, especially after the kind of money Lawrence has put in, maybe they can do something like that. But even then, Lance is very young. I think he's 26, 27, something like that. He's far too young to
was
even
19
think about hanging up the
gloves. So 25. Yeah,
25.
That's the thing. He's been around because he started so long. Like, he's been around for a long time, and he's still. I mean, he's effectively two. Well, he's a little bit younger than Max and been around almost as long. And that it's yeah.
And he's, I think, the second or third youngest podium scorer, something like this.
Yeah, but you look at his results and there's just nothing going on.
Nothing there.
Like the points are
Yeah.
rare. He's got one pole position, a couple of podiums. Like it's just not happening. Like
And
Latifi
the thing is,
obviously is
there's
in a
no
similar
growth.
position. You know, rich Canadian guy, kind of bought his way through the ranks and that, and
True.
but he had an even worse car, and obviously it showed even more
Yeah.
with him because he couldn't like blag his way to good results in a better car. But obviously he's
And
off doing
that's just,
business, whatever it is now, instead of giving up
yeah.
racing. But,
Yeah, I think he's going to London School of Business, something like
mm,
this, becoming an MBA.
mm,
Who would have thought?
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So Aston Martin is what you're. I think my pick might be a bit divergent on that, on this sense, because I think I've gone with McLaren on that front. Because at the start of the season, yeah, of course, because the thing is, at the start of the season, I kind of saw Aston Martin's surge. I mean, again, the preseason prediction that I'd made for the 2023 season, I'm pretty sure it's not going to come true now, because I had predicted Alonso winning a race. I don't see that happening, because Aston Martin has, agreeably, it has tailed off a
yeah,
bit. But for me, the way McLaren has turned things around, it's a huge surprise. And I don't think even they expected this kind of growth or jump. They never talked about it. Throughout the preseason, the talks were, we will become the fourth fastest car on the grid. That is what the entire chatter has been around. But then, since this upgrade has come, it has flipped the season entirely. And if McLaren is able to continue the kind of performance it has shown in until pre Spa, the kind of performance it has shown, I won't be surprised if it ends up being P4 or P3 in the championship. There are 10 races left. That's enough time for them to do that. And yeah, I think, especially after
yeah,
even Andreas Seidel went, it's just the entire team has actually answered all the criticisms that were there since that were there in 2022, when the car was just, it couldn't brake. To be honest, they had poor brakes, and just, I think they had just one podium last season. So from going from that to a season like this,
mm,
where they actually have, they could fight for a win if the stars align. It's a massive jump, and they deserve all the credit.
yeah. I mean, we got a bit of that in the sprint race. Everyone was getting excited that Piastri might win it, and obviously didn't.
Yeah,
And that. And I think Spa wasn't. I mean, Lando said don't expect us to be as strong, and to be honest, they weren't because I mean, Piastri took himself out at the start, and Lando. I still don't know how Lando got himself up to seventh because he was running near the back. He pitted early and was the tires weren't
yeah.
working, and he was near the back, and then he just ends up in seventh and does this insanely long stint.
Yeah. So what
I think they're
happened
still a
in
bit. They're kind
what
of on.
happened?
I'd say they're more.
So what happened with Lando was, when it started raining, it was him and Stroll, the two drivers that opted to pit for soft tires. They basically saw the radar and they
Mm,
gambled that the rain will not be too much to pit for intermediates in the future. So they just pit for soft tires. And the way Lance's car was set up, it was, the car, if there is a car behind him, it can easily overtake him on the straights, because he was losing around a second a lap. But if Lance was able to keep that kind of a gap in the first sector, then he was acing the second sector quite easily. It was during the part when it was raining, where
mm,
Lando was around 2 to 3 seconds quicker than the chasing pack, than the pack that he was competing with, the pack of Tsunoda, Gasly, Ocon, and I think Albon. These were the four drivers that he was competing with, and he was around 4 to 5 seconds quicker.
mm,
That's where he made up. I think in 4 or 5 laps he made up the whole gap, and ultimately in the end he was just managing tires. Stroll did something similar as well. He also pitted, I think, a lap or two after Lando, and he basically had the same strategy. Now Ocon was able to jump Stroll. Maybe if there was one more lap, he might have even jumped Norris as well. But yeah, that is how he kind
mm.
of, basically salvaged the race, where he was completely in trouble. It was entirely down to
Yeah,
him having a very high downforce swing. That is what basically ruined it for him.
yeah. But I think McLaren. I mean, there are races like Silverstone where they were second fastest. I think that on average they're probably still around Aston Martin's pace because it is going up and down
You're
a bit.
taking all the
It's not
all the
consistent in the
conditions
way
into
that
consideration, right?
Mercedes are.
You're basically taking all the
Yeah, if
different
you take an
considerations.
average,
Yeah.
because obviously we've only had a few races of them suddenly being at the front, and the pace has been different in every race.
Yeah.
Whereas Mercedes are kind of now they are consistently second fastest, with Aston Martin tailing off and Ferrari just being Ferrari and that. Um, I think, but I think McLaren they can very at this point, if nothing changes, they can very easily overtake Aston Martin, who are only just ahead of Ferrari now
Yeah.
in the constructors. Um, I think it would be difficult for them to catch Mercedes and Ferrari though, because they're still quite far behind.
Yeah, but
I
Ferrari
mean, they're
has too many of these
almost
peaks and
150
troughs,
points behind Mercedes.
The problem with Ferrari is that it's Ferrari, first of all. It makes too many strategic errors,
Mm,
and then the form of the car, it varies so much from track to track. Like it was very competitive in Spa. You compare it with what happened in Silverstone or
mm,
in Hungary, where the car was nowhere. And that is where McLaren can actually capitalize in races like
yeah,
in any normal track. They will the McLaren should be able. Again, the gap is huge. McLaren needs to have a perfect second part of the season. But again, when you're competing with Ferrari, who tends to self sabotage almost every race, there's still hope.
yeah. I mean, I think it's also the McLaren they're running on a high because you can tell the team is suddenly feeling really good again, and the drivers are. And I mean, Lando tends to complain a lot more than Piastri, but then Piastri's a rookie, and so for him, he doesn't necessarily have the same expectations that I should be getting results this early on,
Yeah,
and so he's just enjoying that the car feels good now. But then, yeah, obviously Ferrari, like you said, are self-sabotaging, but also that you can see just how demoralized they are because Carlos and Charles look miserable
yeah.
because nothing is working, and they're basically battling against their team rather than the other teams. That's how it is for them.
Aptly put. Yeah.
I mean, Charles, he's
There's
it's exposing some it's exposing some weakness. It's exposing some weaknesses because he doesn't seem to be as mentally strong as Carlos. I don't think
yeah.
he is more
True.
prone to. He's probably faster overall, but then he does make more mistakes because he's pushing the car beyond its limits,
Yeah.
and he is just wasting his time at Ferrari. Like he's wasted all of the best racing years, but the thing is there's nowhere else to go that doesn't already have a number one driver and is a good team. That's the thing. So he's basically stuck there for the time being.
I think, yeah. I think ultimately what he's trying to do is when it comes to Charles, he's waiting it out until the end of his current contract. I think it ends in 2024 or probably 25, something like this. And he's not signing any new extension or whatever,
Mm,
which Ferrari is very keen in getting it done. But that is where he's at
yeah.
right now. He's basically weighing his options, and it's smart. He was foolish to sign the extra long contract that he did with Ferrari earlier. But for now, I think he's playing it a bit. I think it's better when you're a Ferrari driver. I think probably Shaz has learned a bit from what happened with Vettel because Vettel had a lot of expectations. He came in with the idea of emulating what Michael did, but he was never given the kind of freedom that Michael had. And then it almost ended up blowing up in his face because
Mm,
Ferrari kept on being Ferrari and kept self sabotaging, while Vettel trying to will the team and trying to shield it from the media. Because when it came to because when Michael was at Ferrari, he was not the guy who was trying to shield the team from the media. The team was shielding him from the Italian press. That was the entire job that Jean Todt and Ross Brawn had. Here, Vettel was exposed, and this is where
mm.
the whole thing, it's such a clusterfuck, to be honest, when it comes to being a Ferrari driver. There are so many moving parts, and for a driver, and that is what usually I tend to hear whatever Peter Windsor says. I'm not a huge fan of his opinions, but there's something that he says very well. He says that Max has 100% brain capacity and it is spent in racing. While Charles has a
Mm.
100% brain capacity, 20 to 30% goes in his conversation with Xavi, his race engineer, who seems far too clueless when he's a race engineer, to be honest. And then the rest is worrying how the strategy will actually pan out. And then he has that 50% capacity left with which he's driving. And if he's doing that, he will never be able to compete with Max, who is basically doing one thing, and that is driving. And he does not need to worry about strategy or anything else because he knows the team will take care of it. And that is actually the case.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating. It's been so
Mm.
long watching
I mean, it's
Ferrari,
part of
and
Max's
the team has
personality in
not changed.
general because
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think it's also partly a Max's personality as well because he's like a cyborg that's perfectly programmed for racing because he's been groomed for this by Yoss since he was a kid. And when he's not racing, like on his weekends off, he spends those doing bloody sim racing, like at home, and he doesn't do anything else. Whereas like Charles has his music and does other things, and Hamilton not so much now, but he used to have his kind of jet set lifestyle, going to all these red carpet events, and he's got his fashion line and all of that. But Max, he does nothing but race basically. He
Yeah.
doesn't think about anything else.
He's a machine.
Um,
And
and
yeah.
that plays a role. But yeah, he's in the position because the team management is so good that he doesn't need to think about everything else. Because Charles, and we saw this a lot with Vettel, he was the one basically doing race strategies on the fly and directing them back to his race engineer, telling them what they should do.
Yeah.
Um,
And that
I mean, if I was
fucks it
him, I
up.
would just come in and out of the pits when I want, and just like, okay, I'm coming in the pits. Hurry up and get the tires. I'm there. Quickly. You've got 10 seconds. Like, just do that and that.
You can bet on it that they won't be at the pits
Yeah,
if you give them
Ferrari
10
has a
seconds.
yeah. For Ferrari have a way of doing because they're a very old team and they pride themselves on their image and their legacy, and they have these quite old fashioned methods of how to run themselves that just don't work
Yeah.
anymore, or they're methods that did work when they had Schumacher and the Dream Team. But for Vettel, it's like, okay, the team is the same, but nothing else was the same when he was there. Like Jean Todt was gone, Rory Byrne, Ross Brawn, all of that. None of them were there anymore. So it was effectively the shell was the same, but there was on the inside it was all completely different.
True.
Like
True. And the entire look,
it's just
even
the same with
when
anything. It's like Williams is still Williams, but without Frank and Claire, it's not, and Patrick Head, it's not really the
the
same
vision is not
Williams that
there.
it was 30 years ago.
Exactly. The vision is not there
Hmm.
because what made Williams was Frank's vision and how he wanted to run the team. And that is how it took the team to where it was. And even for McLaren, during this entire lean period,
Hmm.
why this happened was because, let's be fair, Ron became too old. He was not willing to adapt to the kind of changes that needed to be made. And that is why McLaren went through this entire probably transition from 2013 onwards, where the team didn't really have any true identity. They had a Honda partnership, they didn't know how to make it
Hmm.
work. They had Eric Boulier at the top, and who basically turned out to be one scapegoat who couldn't really do much with the team. And that is the same thing that Ferrari was also trying
Yeah,
to
I mean
go
the
through.
fact
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
yeah, I think with McLaren, apparently the factory is supposed to be a mess in terms of everyone's just very disorganized. I mean, it's better now, but everyone's very disorganized in terms and the team is quite. There's been a lot of changeover because as Ron Dennis is gone and Seidel. It's quite a young team in many respects, and that's reflected in their image that they've got these two very young drivers who both look about 10 years younger than they are driving F1 cars. It's not a team that exudes experience
True,
really
true.
when you look
It
at them.
exudes
It's
energy, and that is what McLaren has been. They always
energy
had these
without
impressive
focus.
drivers.
Like yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, again, when it came to the surprising, the team that surprised me the most, it was McLaren. Now moving to the next part, by the way, we
Hmm.
actually went sideways on this one. We ended up talking about Ferrari and Williams and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now talking about the most surprising driver this season, which is a particular driver that has been a bit of a surprise for you.
I mean, there are several I could think of. I suppose one that comes to mind maybe is Tsunoda, actually,
Yeah.
because he seems to have he's taken the reins at AlphaTauri, and he's talking like a team leader and being quite domineering and everything. But you can tell he's acting as if he's in a Red Bull, in that he's having to push the car to like 110%
Yeah.
just to get 10th place,
11th, not even
and
10th,
things just
11th.
don't work out, and he's very hot-headed and that. But I know he's just it's kind of good to see, because you need that. It's they're going to want to see that he has that sort of strong leadership kind of mentality to him, and
Yes.
he's willing to call the team out when things aren't working and everything. And obviously he walked all over De Vries, and there's, I mean, yeah, De Vries is an interesting case, I suppose, about why that didn't work. But yeah, Tsunoda, he's really pushing the car and just not. He's showing he's got it, or at least he's really trying very hard, and maybe pushing both himself and the car beyond its limits.
You think he'll drive for Red Bull someday?
Potentially, he's the most obvious replacement for Checo. Everyone keeps saying Ricciardo's going to go there, and Ricciardo wants to go. It's like, does he really? Does he want to get shafted by Max again? Because that's what will happen. He's not going to go there and think he's going to be a title like this contender. Like, he got pushed out basically by Verstappen and the first time, and he's not going to. He's. I don't think he can go there expecting to suddenly be beating him again. Tsunoda,
I
if
think
he did, he'd
why
have to go
Ricciardo
there
wants to go there
expecting, like Checo,
is,
just to be a number two.
yeah. So why Ricciardo wants to go to Red Bull is because right now Ricciardo is in his, I don't know how else to call it, but it is basically the Eddie Irvine phase. I think you'll be aware of it. Eddie Irvine basically joined Ferrari because he knew what he wanted to do was go to Ferrari, get millions of dollars, get paid well, drive Ferrari, ultimately grow, take his brand value to a certain point so that he can, if possible, he can cash out with a better team. And that is how he basically ran his entire career. He was
Hmm.
part of Ferrari alongside Schumacher, and he was always one of the more pragmatic number two drivers that has been there in F1. He was very compliable to Michael, didn't really cause any issues or anything like that. In 1999, he almost won the title because Michael was injured, and then
Hmm.
at the end of 99, he cashed out big time with Jaguar. Right
Yeah.
now, I feel, yeah, and right now I feel Ricciardo is trying to do something similar because he knows somewhere down the line he knows that he can't beat Max. I think there's no one on the grid that can beat Max in Red Bull. Forget about being in any other team. That is how good he's been
Yeah.
right now. But the thing is, if he joins Red Bull, he
Hmm.
joins it not only to drive the fastest car on the grid, but also to accentuate the kind of brand appeal that he has right now. I think Ricciardo is arguably the second most famous driver in F1 right now after Lewis, and his brand value
Yeah.
continues to grow.
He's very marketable.
Very,
And
very marketable. And
yeah.
that is what he's trying to focus on right now. With Red Bull, arguably one of the better marketing geniuses in F1, he's he's cashing out. He knows he has this limited 3 to 4 years. He has only, I think, 3 to 4 years left in F1. Realistically, he's trying to cash out in as good a
Hmm.
way as possible, and I think he has a clear path. I think even Red Bull knows. They signed him as a reserve driver for this thing only, for the marketing purposes. That was the entire thing, and they used him well.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they tested him, and apparently his times were good. And even in Hungary, he did a good job. So yeah, let's see what happens with him. But the primary focus seems to be get him in the team, make him a second driver. He will not basically cause any kind of friction with Max, hopefully, and then use that for whatever marketing gains they can. That is the entire. I mean, that is what seems to be the case right now. I don't think they see any driver. They
Yeah.
see in Ricciardo a driver that can challenge Max, plain and simple.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose, and obviously for him, if he's willing to, I have no doubts that he and Verstappen get on really well as friends and teammates. And I suppose if he's willing to accept, okay, we'll bring you back, but you can win the odd race, but you're not going to be. Don't expect to be fighting for titles. If he goes in without that mentality, it'll probably be quite good for him. If he's happy to just drive a good team and cash out at the end.
Yeah, smile
that's
for
where
the
it's
cameras
different.
and
In
all.
that Tsunoda would not be like that because Tsunoda's very young.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas Tsunoda, he would go in thinking, okay, this is my chance to shine. I want to show myself up against the best driver in F1 right now, and I want to win races and that. And because he's so hot-headed, you can see him just basically crashing and burning, and it completely getting to him.
Basically, a repeat of what happened with Albon and
from
Gasly.
that perspective,
right?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. It's a Verstappen thing. He's just I can't think of any other driver, to be honest,
Michael,
other than Schumacher, that is such a teammate killer.
Yeah, Michael is. Michael destroyed teammates.
I mean, and even Michael, he had against Rosberg beat him. But yeah, obviously he had. I mean, when you consider, like, and again, someone mentioned this on Twitter.
Time,
yeah. Obviously, I wish he didn't come back because it ruins his statistics as well. Like, his points average plummets because of those 3 years with Mercedes. But
yeah,
someone mentioned this on Twitter yesterday or on one of my videos about how people say that Schumacher never had any strong teammates, but then Barrichello was undefeated by any of his teammates before he joined Ferrari. And that, but yeah, Schumacher, because even Hamilton, like, obviously he was more than a match. He met more than a match for Alonso, but then, okay, you can argue, well, Hamilton had been with McLaren for a very long time, and he did do an absolute avalanche of testing before the season began.
He
which
basically
Alonso
drove to the moon and back.
That's
the kind of mileage that he had with those Bridgestones.
And then also, obviously, Kovalainen, Kovalainen is just Bottas, but worse, basically. Button could beat him. 2011, Button was better, but then Button had a lot of races in 2012, especially where he just forgot how to drive, basically. And Rosberg, Rosberg was, I think in their 4 years as teammate, Rosberg actually got more pole positions than Hamilton. But obviously, Hamilton won 2 titles to 1 and that. So yeah, Hamilton has had teammates where he's been close with, but Max hasn't really had that so much. Like, 2016, he just joined the team and it was still fairly close with Ricciardo. 2017, he was the one having all the breakdowns, but then 2018, it was Ricciardo having all the breakdowns. But Gasly and Albon are both obviously very good drivers. I mean, Albon has been really impressive this year. It's been a sort of, I'd compare it to sort of Vettel at Toro Rosso 2008, kind of outdriving that car so much.
You think so?
But they just can't. Yeah,
for Albon,
I think so.
do you really think it is that impressive?
Not quite to that degree, because obviously he's made the odd Q3, but he's kind of at the lower end of the points. But it's similar. If we are to assume that the Williams is the slowest car on the grid, which it's determining what the slowest car is actually difficult, because there are like 3 different. It could be that, or it could be the Alpha, or it could be the AlphaTauri. Like, it's one of those, or the Haas. There's like 4 different cars that could be the slowest. Yeah. And we just don't know. And Sargent, because again, Sargent's a rookie, and Sargent, he's better than Latifi, but he's all right. I guess.
I mean, it's been very disappointing.
The only way I could describe him.
It's been so disappointing to see how he's performed, because
he did have
Sargent was very impressive in Formula 2.
Yeah, and now it's just he's
I don't know.
He's had 1 or 2 crashes, but nothing significant. It's just the pace isn't there. And that's that.
I think it might be. It might have something to do with the kind of confidence he's had. I think he started the season well, but the few crashes that he's had, his confidence is kind of stuck. He's maybe a bit. Remember, there was this clip of him crying after a free practice session in Miami. Apparently, something was not working, and he just started crying after the session. And
I didn't know that. I mean, he must have felt the pressure there, because that was his home race as well.
That was home race.
I didn't see that, but he probably does have it. The thing is, he has quite a large following as well, and because there's a lot of quite a burden, because he's the only American driver, and he's the first American driver for several years, and that will kind of get to you. But it's just the driving is just dull. It's the same like Alfa Romeo are just boring because Bottas
Man,
is
it
really
is
dull, and
so
Joe, he
uninspiring.
suddenly had that breakthrough in Hungary.
It is
Yeah,
such
I
an
mean the team is just
uninspiring driver
boring,
lineup.
and
I hate if I had it my way, I would replace both the Alfa Romeo drivers and put anything more interesting, because after every race I
yeah,
have to do these driver ratings. 9 out of 10 times I can guarantee you, for the other 18 drivers, I know from the start to the finish what they were doing. For both Joe Guan Yu and Valtteri
mm,
Bottas, I actually have to go back and see what the hell they were doing in the entire race. They're anonymous. They're completely anonymous, and there's
yeah,
zero. I don't think we even see him. One of the biggest things about Joe Guan Yu right now is, they recently did this video, A to Z, what was it, the race winners or something. They did this video yesterday.
name every a race winner of every letter of the alphabet.
Yeah, Joe had only one clip.
Mm,
That is all. In the entire 15-16 minute thing, there was only a 1 to 2 second clip for which
yeah,
he was present. That is all. And why? Because no one wants to see him. And I'm being very
yeah. I
not
mean,
to
he's
offend, but
just
that is
this is the
actually the
thing. Like,
case. It's nothing. It's basically mediocrity.
yeah, I mean, this is the thing.
Every weekend there is only mediocrity from that team. And
It's very similar. If you think 20 years ago, you would have had drivers like Ralph Furman or Gianmaria Bruni or Christian Albers, ones that just do a year or two at the back, and yeah, just drivers like that. They do a couple of seasons at the back or the lower midfield, and nothing interesting happens. And there's not, like we've shown, the only things he's done that stand out were his massive shunt at Silverstone last year, and then Hungary, where he suddenly got
P5,
fifth,
yeah.
but then the car stalls at the start. I think the thing is, I think even without that, he probably would have finished outside the points because Bottas started ninth, and then he finished
Yeah,
12th
even
or
Bottas had a
something.
bad start. Bottas
But
was
yeah,
P13,
and
14 by
Bottas, I mean, Bottas always has bad starts, but like Joe, the thing is, he went to the back and then he
yeah.
made virtually no positions anyway. So I think the race pace wasn't there. But even so, we could have seen him doing something
For a
because
change, be
it's like
visible.
he's as a guy, he's nice enough as a guy. Everyone loves him as a person. Again, he doesn't say or do anything controversial, and he likes to dress elaborately like
And
Hamilton
that's the
does and
only
that.
thing.
But it's just really boring to watch.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Yeah, and his junior career was not bad. I mean, he was kind of. I mean, he won
I think
Asian Formula
when
3,
it
but
comes
otherwise, it's
to
like okay, he's kind of at or near the top. But
yeah, when it comes to Joe, there has been one thing that has been very consistent with him. When it comes to underlying pace, he has it. He has the pace to beat a Valtteri Bottas convincingly. And he even this season he has done it a few times. The problem with him is he has
mm,
never been consistent in his entire career. He'll win one race and then he'll disappear for 5 race weekends. And he does it so many times throughout his F2
mm,
career, throughout his F3 career. In terms of raw pace, he could have even the championship battle between Callum Ilott and Mick Schumacher. Callum was Joe's teammate, and there were times when Joe was easily the faster driver. It was, I think, UNI
yeah,
Virtuosi for
yeah,
which the two drove. And then you see,
mm,
ultimately, you look at the point standings, and Joe is nowhere, and that happens so many times. And even now, it's just the same thing.
yeah.
There's no growth, and that is it's just the same thing with Stroll. On his day, he can beat a Fernando Alonso, and I can say that he can actually beat Fernando Alonso on his day. But that day will come once
Mm.
in an entire season. 22
I
races, he'll
mean,
have one
that
race
day
weekend,
hasn't
probably a
come since
Barcelona.
2020.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think his day hasn't happened since Turkey 2020. Basically, that's the last
Yeah,
example I
that
can
was the
think
last
of him
one.
actually being decent because last year, I mean, like the last like 21, 22, there were a few races where he beat Vettel, but like to be honest, that car was awful, and Vettel had mentally checked out last year because he knew he was retiring, and
Pretty
I don't think
much.
he cared what happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing. Stroll hasn't had any. It's annoying because every so often he can be really, really good,
Yeah.
but that just hasn't happened for a very, very long time now. Like that's the thing is, and that's where he's done it because like That's why you can compare him to Roy Nissany in that
Oh,
he's a pay driver that just
I
hangs around
mean,
way longer than he should, and
yeah,
he's making a career in F2, which you're not supposed to do. But Nissany never has good races. I mean, there was one he looked like he was a contender to win at Imola last year, and then he crashed in the pit lane or
yeah.
something like that. He has a
He's
points
basically
average of like
the
0.2
Pastor
points per
Maldonado of
race or
Formula 2.
something as well.
That is what he is.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, Formula 2. I mean, I think how old is he? He's 25, 26, something like this. Roy Nissany. He's very old.
I think he's actually like 28. He's quite
28.
old.
Jesus. And yeah.
27, 28. Yeah.
Anyhow, actually, by the way,
He's been in F2 basically since it started. But yeah.
is it? Yeah. I mean, I've seen him for 4 or 5 years. I think before that, I never noticed that he was there or not. But he's been crashing a bit more in the
I
last few
think
years.
2019 he's been around like Ralph Boschung. He's been around for a long time, but Boschung has only just started getting full-time seats like this year or the year before.
Yeah.
But they've been doing it for a long time, way longer than they should.
Even
Nobody
he's much
should
older, right?
realistically be doing more than 2 years F2.
Yeah. Boschung is also, I think.
Boschung is late. He's late 20s as
Yeah,
well.
exactly. I think he's Kushmani's teammate.
And
no?
he had,
So
yeah.
I've seen him. I think he won the first race or something like this.
Yeah, I mean he won. He finished first and second on the first weekend, and then this weekend I think were the first points he'd scored since then. He's just been totally. I thought he was going to fight for the title. I think he did, and then he scored no points up until Spa.
Yeah, I think yeah, it was only now that he scored points.
Yeah.
So yeah, by the way, when it comes to the biggest
Yeah.
surprise in terms of drivers, I had the same pick. So yeah, when it comes to Yuki, I think I tend to agree with you on a few things. I'm slightly worried with his relative performance against Daniel because I think the first two races have shown that Nyck de Vries he did not deserve to be in Formula One, especially if ultimately the aim is to get him to a Red Bull. I don't think he deserved to be a part of the AlphaTauri project and take it from there. That is quite evident. But what is slightly surprising for me was the kind of weekend that Ricciardo had in Hungary and even to an extent in Spa as well. The relative pace and the gap between the two overall, it's not much. It's a tenth or two. And we are looking at Ricciardo, who did not even drive the AlphaTauri in the simulator before he sat in the car for the first time in Hungary, because till then he was doing the entire work for the Red Bull team. And if he was able to do that
Yeah.
unprepared, without any preparation or even having whatever race rust that exists, from there to having the entire summer break to prepare, to sit in the simulator, get things on board, learn how the team works and everything, I'm slightly worried about Ricciardo, about Sonoda and how he will fare in the second half of the season. Because the thing is, there's one thing that Helmut Marko, yeah, sorry. So there's one thing that Helmut Marko revealed just recently, and that is that Sonoda and Iwasa, the two Japanese drivers, they're actually Honda managed. So will Red Bull be willing to promote a Honda backed or a Honda managed driver into the senior team? Or will they just keep him there until the 2025 contract expires with Honda? That is actually somewhat surprising and something that needs to be kept in mind.
Yeah. I think Tsunoda's going to be in for a bit of a shock in the second half because he's not going to be the team leader that he's trying to make himself.
Yeah.
Because even if he's been in the team, well, he hasn't been. This is the thing. Ricciardo is newer to the team, but then Ricciardo drove for them 10 years ago for 2 seasons. And so he already has. It's a team he has experience of. It's different to when he went to Renault and McLaren, which was a sort of any port in a storm kind of thing, because he's been with the Red Bull family for forever. And he's obviously more comfortable here. And again, he's only been out of the loop for 6 months.
10 races.
He's not coming back
That's
as
all.
if it's not like he left in 2019 and has never driven a ground effect car before.
Yeah.
But it does mean. So I think it takes him a few races to get going. I mean, De Vries was an interesting one because he wasn't a Red Bull driver. He'd always been a Mercedes junior. And obviously he had that very impressive debut Monza last year, where he started out the weekend with Aston Martin, and then he's jumped in the Williams and beats Latifi. But he again was basically invisible because aside from not doing anything in the races, all I remember really seeing from him this year was him crashing in Baku. But he wasn't getting much in the terms of
Yeah,
media coverage, appearances. He just felt very invisible the whole time.
basically
And
a
I thought to
joke
myself,
on you
maybe they should at least
kind
let
of
him hang
mode.
on until the summer break. Yeah. And just nothing going on. And people say, oh, well, he won F2 and then he won Formula E. It's like, okay, he won F2, but the runner-up was Latifi. That was an extremely uncompetitive season. And I don't know if you
Yeah,
can really count Formula E, to be honest. I mean, when you look, he scored less than 100 points. I mean, his results are so bad. It's just that everyone else's results were worse. There was nothing. He got 2 wins, 2 seconds,
actually
and
that
one or
is the
two
thing, and
points, and
this
that was it. And he still wins the title.
that is exactly the point I was trying to make at the start of the season when I said that Nyck de Vries is not a Red Bull product in any which way. I cannot understand why Helmut Marko has picked
Mm,
him up, and that is exactly the thing. I mean, whatever points you're making right now, his F2 campaign, I think it was his third year, and in the previous 2 seasons he had been utterly dominated by Leclerc and then Russell, and then you move to Formula
mm,
E, and I think in terms of action, Formula E is nice, but the thing is, it is just too unpredictable. Anyone can win, and I mean,
mm.
other than John Eric Verne winning the title twice, we don't have a repeat winner. Every year, someone else wins, and there is just no predictability to the series, and that is why somehow it just puts me off. I can watch it on and off, but I tend not to follow it because even you talk about Stoffel Van Doon, he won the title last season. He was nowhere this season. The year before that, Van Doon was Nick de
Mm.
Vries' teammate, and de Vries won the title. Before that, de Vries was 10th or 11th in the championship. So you cannot say that X driver is better than Y or X team is better than Y. It's basically whatever works that day or whatever works that year. It's all up for grabs.
Mm.
Well, through all of it,
And it's
Mahindra is one fuck also.
I
What am I? Who am I to say
yeah,
anything?
I just can't take this it seriously. Is my problem. It's just that the circuits are so stupid because they're ridiculously narrow,
Yeah,
and the driving standards are very questionable because the entire grid is basically made up of ex midfield drivers and drivers that tried and failed to get into F1, and so they basically settled in Formula E.
true.
And it just does. It's just yeah. There's nothing that you don't really get these like standout drives, like a last to first or whatever, and that. And they
There's
had, I mean,
nothing.
another thing in
There's
2019.
nothing.
That was the year
Seriously.
when they kept disqualifying people because the batteries kept running out before on the last
Yeah.
lap, and there were races where they disqualify like 6 different drivers or something.
I mean, they had
But you see some of the crashes they've had. They've had the most insane
that's
pileups. Like
the,
there's like
the
6
recent one
cars
I
all going
think
off at
which
one corner
featured.
together, like
I think I don't remember which driver it was.
in Rome.
Yeah, that was
It was
crazy.
Buemi went into somebody at full speed and that.
I mean,
I mean, the cars. The thing is, the aero doesn't seem to matter because if the front wing breaks off and they just keep going as well, like it doesn't seem to affect them much. I mean, they're so slow as well.
the
Like put
arrow
them on
doesn't play
Monza,
any
they'd be
role.
going like a snail's pace.
Yeah, the arrow doesn't play any role.
Yeah, I mean, the cars look
And
like they're made of
did you see
plastic. The
this
way
particular race?
the
I
wings
think
break off
there
so easily.
was there was this like they had this race recently. They were 30 or 40 laps, and they had like 400 or 500 something overtakes. And it wasn't overtakes. It basically no one wants to lead the race because ultimately the other driver will be
Yeah,
in its draft and he'll save energy. That is a huge
it's
design flaw.
NASCAR.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this in F1, the whole thing of DRS chicken, and stuff, and we're doing it with this. It's like it's when you get things like that that I cannot
Yeah,
stand.
no one wants to lead the
That
race.
playing
What's the
those
point of
little
it?
games and yeah,
It's just
yeah,
yeah. Anyhow, enough of the Formula E rant.
yeah.
Yeah. Moving to the next part. I
Mm.
think we might touch on it. We might have touched on it a bit earlier as well. What do you think was the biggest shock of the 2023 F1 season?
I guess. Well, I would say the sudden rise of McLaren, but I think the rise of Piastri, in particular, because obviously beginning of the season, it took him a few races to get into a rhythm, and that he was just kind of accepting the car wasn't very good. Lando was complaining a lot, but now he's had a few races where he's effectively matching Lando and out qualifying him in that. And he's kind of one of the hottest prospects in terms of rookies that we've seen probably since Leclerc or even Vettel. That he now seems like he's well positioned to win a race if Red Bull can't, and if the stars align, I suppose. But that's not really a surprise when you look at how good his junior career was, because there are some people that do really amazing juniors and then they kind of fall off in F1, and that obviously hasn't happened to him. Yeah. I mean, obviously with Schumacher, people say he may have had an illegal engine in
that's rubbish
in F2 and that.
That's rubbish. But absolute rubbish. I've seen that season.
I don't know. I hear the thing is his
you
race
see
starts
a lot of
unreal,
theories in
but like the rest of it is
I mean, on Twitter, I've seen some very wacky theories about Mick Schumacher's junior career. And even if you try to put some credence into that, it doesn't make any sense. There are people that want to just hate on the guy because he's a Schumacher. And you can see it through the entire reasoning that they put together. And it just doesn't make any sense to waste any time on it. Yeah. Anyhow, go ahead regarding Piastri.
Piastri, yeah. I mean, he's again another just. I think having a year off, it's annoying that it had to happen, because you think, well, that shouldn't really be happening to F2 champions, that your reward is to do nothing. It obviously did help him, probably more Alonso's influence than Alpine's, because he decided to jump ship. With them, but he's adapted. He's adapted well, and he doesn't seem phased by being up against Lando. And I think obviously both of them are in a good position. That's a team
Do
they
you
can
think
sort. Well, for the time being, that's a
Piastri,
lineup that.
So do you think Piastri can do to Norris what Max did to Ricciardo in Red Bull? Basically, enter the team when the other driver was the lead driver, then slowly take over.
I think that's definitely a potential. I mean, in terms of their temperament, Lando complains a lot more when things don't work, and whereas Piastri is quite sort of blank in that he doesn't seem to. He has high expectations, but he doesn't really seem to get rattled when things don't work out as they should.
He's an Aussie, and doesn't say much.
And that's where maybe you think that he can. Yeah, and that's where you think, well, obviously, it's more likely to get to Lando, because I suppose Lando for himself, now with Sainz gone and with Ricciardo gone, he sees himself as the senior driver, and he's been with McLaren for a long time now, and he's older as well. But I think give once he's gotten into a bit more of a groove, Piastri could kind of come in and usurp it. It would be very close with them.
Yeah,
it could be
because there are a lot of things that are
very
different.
Interesting if they had a title contending car.
Yeah. That's what
I feel like.
That's what I'm slightly. The comparison I made. The reason behind it was because I don't think there has ever been a driver, at least in the last couple of decades, who was as highly touted as Max, and who was as swiftly promoted to a senior team as Max was, because he was a Red Bull driver as a teenager. The thing is, when you talk about Piastri and Norris, I think they're only 1 year apart. I think he's 23, Norris is 23, and
they're about 8.
Piastri is 22.
So Norris is November 99, and then Piastri is April 2001. So there's about 18 months apart in age.
Yeah, still that's not a huge gap. Yeah. You talk about the gap between Ricciardo and Max. It was how big? It was quite big. I think it was 5 to 6 years minimum.
8 years, 89, and then 97. Yeah. 8 years.
So around 8 years of a gap. So basically, in that particular scenario, Red Bull had the incentive to build the team around Max. Plus, Max was basically a bona fide,
Mm.
you can say, once in a generation talent. Now, for McLaren, the situation is somewhat different because both of these drivers, they are touted very highly. Lando has established himself and is still very young. If ultimately it comes down to where Piastri slots himself, if he starts beating Lando, then you could see McLaren maybe gyrating more towards him. But if that does not happen, I think somewhere down the line I feel that this partnership is not going to be a sustainable one. Maybe a year or two together, then they might come together or have a collision or something, and then they'll fall off. Something is in the
Mm.
something might happen because the two are very
I th-
competitive, very close to each other, and
if one
if
of
you
them
raise in
cracks, I
close
think
quarters this
it'll be
much,
Lando. Um,
yeah, could be possibly.
mm.
But the thing is, we've not seen Oscar.
I mean, because I feel with
I think the jury is still out on Oscar, right? Because he's still not raised in all these conditions. We've seen Norris be in those stressful conditions. We've not seen Oscar in those conditions yet. So maybe we are probably jumping the gun a bit there,
mm.
right?
I feel like with Lando with McLaren, they're still somewhat kind of broken by Russia 2021 because after that
Oh
happened,
yeah,
the team just vanished for the rest of that season. And I think Lando, he's still thinking of the win that could have been, and now that the car is not there, that's kind of maybe getting to him, that sort of lost opportunity. And
yeah,
people keep talking about him
true,
wanting to look at other
definitely.
teams, and it's like, well, he may as well stay with what he knows. Like, because if he goes to Mercedes, that would be presumably to replace Hamilton, and then he's got to fight against George, and he's not going to go. He's not going to go to Red Bull because nobody really wants to go up against Max at the moment,
Yeah,
or no one with any real title aspirations.
yeah,
So he may
for
as well
sure.
just stick at McLaren and build something long term there, like Hakkinen did or something.
He can, yeah. I think yeah. The
Mm.
thing is, if McLaren had not had this kind of turnaround that it has shown in the last few races, Lando would have look for another team probably. But since McLaren has shown that it can secure
Mm.
podiums, maybe maybe get closer to the front, maybe Lando might think about sticking around. I think now, at least for short term, McLaren has secured Lando's services, which I was slightly worried about because the season started quite poorly.
I was going to say, I just say with McLaren, I think it's just good. I mean, yeah, Zach Brown seems to have a good vision and good leadership because they're covering a lot of bases. I
Yeah,
mean, the Formula E team is kind of useless, but they've got a reasonably good thing going on in IndyCar with like Pato O'Ward and
yeah, true.
Alex Rossi and the Rosenquist and that.
Rosenquist, yeah.
So it seems to be working in terms of that, and so yeah, and so it's like it's a good place for him to be. It's better than it's the limited option. I think this is the phase of any driver. It's just limited options because people are so embedded in a lot of their teams, especially the top teams. And with people like Hamilton and Alonso, who are much older, still not looking like they're anywhere near retiring,
Yeah,
that's limiting options for moving, and even for
true.
rookies coming in from F2.
I think I'm somewhat, yeah, I agree with you on that. And I don't think we're getting any new rookies next season as well. Maybe Teo Porcher replaces Joe Guan Yu, but I'm still
Yeah, I
not
keep
sure.
seeing
Yeah,
on Twitter that Joe might go to Haas in place of Magnussen, and then Pourchaire would go up to Alpha. But
yeah.
like the
How
others,
is I
I mean,
don't get
Vesti.
that.
Well, he just
I mean, how is Joe
yeah.
Guan
I don't
Yu?
know. There's some connection.
Okay, so connection with Alfa Romeo probably.
There's some kind of I've forgotten what it was they were talking about on Twitter. There's some kind of connection that Joe has got, or the reason he's being sponsored. I can't remember what it is, but there's some reason to think he might go to Haas,
Oh,
and then Pourchaire would come in. But I don't really see why they would bother with that. But in F2, like
yeah,
Frederick Vesti, he just lost the title lead, but he's a Mercedes junior. He's not going up to F1 anytime soon, especially since he would have to
no,
leapfrog Mick first to even be in line for a seat.
they'll yeah.
And the rest of
Mercedes
them,
will
like
have such
Iwasa,
poor
like there are way
PR
too
in
many Red Bull
Germany.
juniors.
Yeah, yeah. What's the deal with that? I mean, they've got I think one third of the F2 field, which is basically draped in Red Bull livery, and none of them are good enough to fight for the title right now. Probably Ivasa, but he's still basically an
Yeah.
outsider. I don't.
Yeah, he's still like he has good races, but then he still crashes a lot and has race just very slow. And Zane Maloney's nowhere near, and Hauger was insane for no reason in F3, and now he's just kind of dog shit
Yeah,
in F2. And
yeah.
yeah, there's just they've got way too many drivers and it's the same at Alpine as well, because the two like
Those two
Doohan
are
and
good though.
Martins are the main
Both
reserves, and
Doohan and
Doohan is
Martins are
kind of
actually good
working
though.
they are good. I mean, Martins again was excellent F3. He kind of started quite badly in F2, but he's getting into a rhythm, and Doohan has now become an outsider for the title. But again, there's nowhere for them to go because
Yeah,
it's
nothing.
just the grid is
They're
too
basically
small, so
staying
there's
for
just
another
lack of
season.
options. And again, because test drivers don't. Yeah, because test drivers have got nothing to do. You can see why people are thinking, well, I'll stick it out in F2 because my other options are doing what Drugovich is doing, which is to not drive the car and instead do the like post-race live show and and the same with Pietro
Yeah,
Fittipaldi. There's nothing to do,
entirely.
so he's doing his endurance racing and maybe one test a year. It's like you may as well stick it in F2 and then maybe just try IndyCar or Formula E because at least you're racing.
Yeah, I mean
It's just such
that's
a bad
yeah.
system.
But the thing is, let's be fair. Out of all these Formula Two drivers, do you see anyone who will be a future world champion?
Not really.
Exactly, exactly my point. There's no one that has stood out the
Uh,
way Piastri did. Arguably the last
yeah, I
one.
mean, people
Theo
look at
Porcher used
Behrman,
to
and it's
earlier,
I
but
still, yeah, I still think, yeah, Pourchaire's not just being a bit, yeah, he's tailing off. But yeah, people get excited by Behrman because he's very young and he's a Ferrari junior, I think, is
whom?
or maybe it's just the I get
Ollie Bearman. Oh
Ollie
yes,
Behrman.
yes. How can I'm so impressed with him. I'm very impressed with him, and he's only 17.
Hmm.
So that is one driver I'll keep an eye on.
Is he
Yeah,
Ferrari? Because
he
I
is
get the thing
Ferrari.
is Ferrari and
Yeah,
Prema feel basically the same at this point. I could,
yes, he's
yeah,
Ferrari Junior. So it's basically his career is ruined, but at least he'll get to Formula One. I mean, that is at least
yeah,
what I
it'll
think.
happen when it happens. I mean,
I think yeah. So for me, I think next season Ollie Bearman will be the favorite to win the title in Formula Two. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
yeah,
Unless you have Martins and Doohan sticking around. If those two are sticking around in Formula 2, maybe they can battle it out. But I think Behrman is going to be the front runner. He actually has the raw pace,
mm,
and even maybe that kind of, I think if anyone has followed the early years of Max Verstappen, the questionable driving, that almost trying to gain what gain some advantage in wheel to wheel battles. Ollie does it a lot, where his moves are
yeah,
sometimes very questionable. And and you can almost go back and think how Max used to operate, or even Michael in his earlier days, or Senna. He has that knack, although he doesn't have that pace, at least for now. Maybe he might, because he's very young, 17 or 18. I think it's similar to what Lando was. Lando was also 17 or 18 something when he did his F2 debut season.
mm.
So probably there might be a potentially impressive driver there. But other than him, I don't know. Doohan is nice, Martins is good, but they are not. They don't jump out of the screen like an Oscar Piastri did in his very first race when he won the feature race.
Yeah.
There hasn't been any.
I mean, Victor Martins did until he went into F2 because he'd won Formula Renault
Hmm.
Euro Cup and then he won Formula 3 and all of that. But then he's
He's good. He's
not been
good.
so good
He's
here.
competitive.
And like I said before,
Yeah.
Hauger was a funny one because his first year in F3 was awful, and then he trounced everyone 2 years ago, and then he's just been average in F2.
See, even
Um,
see, even he had that illegal engine or something probably.
mm.
Maybe that helped him get the F3 title.
But
I mean,
he,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I try to look back as far as I can to see who might be in F1 in 5 years' time or something. But like in F3, Bortoletto's about to win the title, but it's like who? Like he's the only
Exactly.
he hasn't crashed. That's why. Like because the
That's
other
the only
guys, it's
thing.
like
Yes.
O'Sullivan and Paul Aaron. They're the ones that are supposed to do the big stars. That yeah. And then I mean everyone's making a huge deal about Kimi
Antonelli.
Antonelli and that, and it's like yeah, well if maybe he can keep it going because he's in Frecker and he's doing perfectly well. But the rest of Frecker, there's like who else? There's like off the top of my head, it's like there's Cass Havercourt, and otherwise I'm just like I don't really know any of them, like who's going to be good and who isn't. It's just yeah.
So yeah, I think even I agree with you on that. I think Kimi Antonelli might be the next big thing. I mean, that is how he's been touted as. And you'll be surprised to see
Mm,
that kid generates a lot of traffic, at least on the websites. So I've had a few of my writers write a few pieces with him, specifically his life and all that. They gain such
mm.
traction. He's called the next Max Verstappen. And I don't know if he's that good, but the kid has a lot of hype around him. A lot of hype.
Yeah, I mean
Let's see how it
he's
does.
running at the front in Frecker. He's not running away with it in Frecker, but he's in
Yeah.
he's definitely in the title fight
I think he's not
with
leading the championship right now, is he?
I
Or
can't remember
maybe I
who
missed the
with,
last
but
race.
yeah. Or he is, or he's close.
He's
I
close
can't
to
remember. I
it.
think it's like Lorenzo Fluxer and
Yeah.
Josh Dirksen and
Something like
Cass
that.
Havercourt. They're the other front runners. I can't remember half their names. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, good thing for him is he has
Mm,
Toto as the mentor. And Toto tends to he does slow roll these things. He's not like Red Bull that he'll just throw the guy into the deep end. He'll probably take him through the ranks
mm.
one by one and ultimately have him reach Formula 2, and then maybe when he wins the title send him to Williams for 3 years of degradation and then finally get him to Mercedes. But yes, I think he's one driver that one maybe we
Yeah.
need to keep an eye on. Other than that, I don't think there's we talk about it that maybe Formula 2 champions should be getting a direct entry into Formula 1. There are quite a few that don't even deserve a seat. I'm not a huge fan of Frederick Vesti. He might have had a good season this year. Overall, you look at it, he's not really
Mm.
impressed. Maybe this year him being with Prema has been a huge benefit to him, and teams play a huge role. That is something you cannot deny. So maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, what I was going to do, and this is again is coming up in my sort of manifesto, is that because I want a 13 car grid, is that I'd make the 13th team a team directly controlled by the FIA, which serves no purpose other than to give Formula 2 drivers a seat. So the idea is that the Formula 2 champion automatically gets a seat with that team unless they're
Okay.
offered a seat with another team, and
Yeah.
then they'll move up along with the runner up or someone else high ranking that gets it. And the idea is that at least you get 1 year in Formula One, even if you get kicked out again at the end of the year or something. Because otherwise you end at this position. Like Felipe Drogovic is. I don't think he's got anywhere left to go
I think
other
he's
than
going to
Formula E
Formula
now
E.
because he before he won his title and he had some really dominant weekends, and before his title year when he was at MP Motorsport he had he would have the odd weekend that was just insane, and then
Yeah.
loads where he was just kind of
Yeah.
invisible. You look at it because he wasn't in any driver academies, that kind of made it stand out more. And it's the same with Bortoletto. He's not in a driver academy,
Yeah.
and you're kind of assumed, oh, it's only going to be Ferrari and Mercedes juniors that do well now.
Yeah.
Um, and just yeah, you get some where you're like, should they really have won that title and that.
Yeah.
But you need to give them something, especially if it's like you can't race in F2 anymore. Where it's like
No, that's actually
they
the
got to give
case. I
them something
mean,
to do.
there's they probably have the worst wake behind the car as compared to even Formula One right now. There are a lot of issues with the cars. I mean, the cars that were there earlier during Charles Leclerc's time, they were much better. That's not the case anymore. Anyhow, enough talk about Formula Two.
Yeah.
We went on an entirely different tangent on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Finally, though,
Yeah.
yeah, we've gone for with the shock of the season as well. Finally, now, since as a passing note, who one bold prediction from you for the 2023 F1 season?
Well, it's going to be similar to the previous point. To the previous point, I think that Piastri is going to win a race.
Wow. See, I
Yeah.
even I had
In
a
my
prediction
first half,
from
it was going to
McLaren
be Lance
only.
Stroll was going
I
to win a race, but
huh? Sorry.
yeah. But earlier on in the season, my prediction was Lance Stroll's going to win a race. But now that Aston Martin have gone off a cliff, I've turned my attention towards McLaren more. Because
Yeah,
because I thought Alonso could win a couple, but that's obviously not happening. So
yeah. It
yeah,
does.
let's go look at McLaren.
It might. It might. You never know. If Aston Martin brings something similar to the kind of upgrade that McLaren had, maybe the team can. Because the thing is, there's something that
Hmm.
has gone wrong since Canada for Aston Martin.
Didn't they bring in a new upgrade
There,
package?
yeah,
And
there are rumors
maybe
that
that
it's
obviously just hasn't
probably
worked
cost them
or
a lot.
something.
Yeah, there are rumors that the upgrade is
Yeah.
probably something that has compromised the setup or something, and they are not entirely sure how to go ahead with it. So probably they'll scrap that and go in an entirely different direction. Let's see how that
Because the
works.
car's supposed to be very draggy, which is not going to help
Yeah,
them in Monza.
yeah. Monza,
Mm.
Monza. I think Monza is going to be probably Red Bull versus Ferrari. I think Ferrari will get another pole position because the car is quite good on the straights, and probably they'll crank it up again
Mm.
just like they did last season. And the race
Yeah.
is again, Max is going to win it
Red Bull with
quite
their,
easily.
with their flexi wing and triple DRS and all of
Triple
that. Like,
DRS.
yeah.
No, that's
Yeah.
true. That's true. When it comes to the bold prediction
Mm.
for the rest of the season, I had something similar, but I'm actually going with Norris on this one. I think Norris is going to win his first race of his F1 career, because again, there will be a race where
Mm.
I can't believe that Red Bull is going to win all 22 races. Although it will be interesting to see because people on Twitter will lose their mind. Um, I don't think that will happen. There will be a race or two where somehow or the other Red Bull will trip up. And I think that particular race, you might see Norris being the one who picks up the scraps. Probably it will be Norris or Lewis. These are the two contenders that I think might win the race this season. I'm going with Norris.
Yeah.
Most likely that I think Norris is going to be the
Mm.
one who's going to win that race. So yeah, that's my pick.
Mm.
Cool. So that was the mid season report. I don't know, mid season review from us. I hope you had a good time, Peter. This was comparatively shorter as compared to the one that we had last time. We went for 2.5 hours the last time around. So
Yeah,
probably,
we went on for about 3 hours in the previous one.
yeah,
There's a lot of talk about like Narain
that was
Karthikeyan
long.
and stuff.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that was fun by the way. So yeah, I had a good time.
Mm.
I hope you had a good time, man.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. There will be few videos that will be coming your way, a few other podcasts as well that have been recorded. So stay tuned and see you next time.